Hey everyone, welcome to my very first Imperial Guard painting tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this Cadian shock troop. I began by carefully removing all of the applicable pieces from the sprues. Then with a sharp hobby knife, I carefully removed as many of the mold lines as I can from the pieces, which unfortunately there were a bunch of them, as there tends to be on these new Necron models. I primed the model gray using Vallejo Air Model Gray Primer. I then sprayed all of the clothing on the Cadian with a 1-to-1 mix of Karak stone to Ushabti bone. This produced a light brown color, which actually came pretty close to the color of khaki. I then gave all of the clothing an Agrax Earthshade. Once the shade was dry, I actually went and did a Drybrush of Ushabti bone over it. I unfortunately lost the footage for this one step, so it just won't be shown. However, you'll notice in the next one that it is dry and then the tone of it is slightly lighter for the clothing. I then turned my attention to the skin by first base coating it Ratskin Flesh. This is one of the new pretty cool skin tone colors from Citadel, and this was my first time trying it out, and overall I have to say that I was actually pretty happy with the skin tones from Citadel. I then gave the skin a Reikland Fleshshade, which will get in the crevices and give the skin a lot of tone to it and some depth. I then gave the skin 2 highlights consecutively. The first highlight was with Bestigor Flesh, focusing on almost all the areas except for the deep recesses where the shaded areas would end up. And then I did one more highlight, focusing on more on just the outer edges with Ungor Flesh. Remember, the key with these skin tones is to make sure that they're blended properly and that there's a good transition between colors. That way it looks realistic and there's a very smooth transition of colors over the entire skin area. And finally, I just did a very quick light dry brush over these flesh areas using Eldar Flesh, which will just give it a little bit lighter of a tone on all the most outward parts. I painted his boots, his belt, his chin strap, and the little packs on his belt with Abbadon black. I made sure to dilute the Abbadon black just slightly, since it is a base color and it tends to go on a little bit thick. I base coated his armor as well as his helmet Castellan green. I found that it went on actually slightly thin, so I did 2 very thin coats over these areas just to make sure that it had very good coverage and to build up the nice color over these areas. I also painted his gun Castellan green to match his armor and helmet. I then gave all these green areas a Biel tan green shading. This is to once again get in the recesses as well as darken this green just slightly to give it a slightly older, dirtier appearance and to provide some nice depth in the color. Though I know that most of these Cadian shock troopers wouldn't survive a battle since they're basically cannon fodder, however, you don't want them to look completely pristine. You want to make it look a little bit more experienced on the battlefield. When the shading was dry, I highlighted these green areas with Straken green. Straken green is one of the two layers, it's the lighter of the two layers that goes along with Castellan green. This was basically an edge highlighting as I just focused more on the outer edges just to give these green areas a little bit more detail. Focusing more on the areas which light would hit. When the armor was finished, I then turned my attention to the metal areas by starting off with Ironbreaker. Out of all the metallics, I really like painting the metals starting with Ironbreaker a lot of the time. Unless you're going for some super depth in the color, and then I'd recommend starting with the darker metallic, which is Lead Belcher. I then gave all these metal areas on the gun a Nuln oil shading. As always, this shading is supposed to get in the recesses, give it an older, dirtier appearance, and give it some depth. And it does an excellent job of doing so, if I must say so myself. I then painted his Canteen using Warboss green. I specifically did not use the same colors that I used in the armor, just to create a little contrast and a little variation in the green colors, since Citadel now offers a variety of greens. And then I gave the Canteen a Nuln oil shading to also bring out the details in that area, as well as give it an older appearance. I painted his eyes first with white scars. I then painted the pupils in the eyes using Abaddon black. The key to this step is specifically knowing exactly where your brush is, a very steady hand, and just putting a little tiny dot of paint in the eye at a time. I painted the symbols on his helmet, his gun, and his canteen, as well as I did a lot of edge highlighting over all the black areas on the model with Administratum gray. And not to be repetitious, but then I gave all these gray symbols a non-oil shade as well. I personally like to do shadings one part at a time, so that while I'm shading one area and then it will dry, I can paint another area and then shade it while the other ones are drying as well. I then went and did a quick highlight over these areas, once again just focusing on the edges with Administratum gray. And that's it! You now know how I painted up my Cadian shock troop for the Imperial Guard army. Overall, I have to say that I really like the way that it turned out. It wasn't that hard of a model to paint, but it actually had some good detail to it, and I really like how it turned out. I definitely understand, as I said before, why people love this army. it's really cool to paint up humans, especially these guys who aren't very heavily armed. But yeah, I really liked it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial too. So as always, thank you to all you people out there for watching my videos. You guys are awesome. Please like the video, leave a comment on if there's anything else you'd like for me to do, as well as subscribe to my channel if you already haven't done so. So, till next time, this is Jay saying, happy painting everyone.